Okay. All right. Thank you, Lori. You all were probably expecting a sandy beach or somebody here tonight, but I'm afraid you're stuck with me. You all are the ones that couldn't find a Christmas party to go to tonight. Right? But thank you for being here. It's kind of a short notice thing. Danny, thank you. And so I'm going to have to lean heavily on my note. Anyway, my name's Dick Edwards, and I also happen to be an alcoholic. I've been an alcoholic for a long, long time. I don't know if any of you all do this, but when I go through the book, which I've done several times, believe it or not, I tend to focus on things that I can identify with. And there's one page that I keep going back to because it has special meaning for me. It's on page 423 in the stories in the back. Buried on that page is one long sentence that says the primary difference between non-alcoholics and alcoholics is that non-alcoholics change their behaviors to meet their goals. Alcoholics change their goals to meet their behaviors. That pretty much sums up the way I've managed my life and my affairs forever, since the beginning. Non-alcoholics do it right. Alcoholics do it backward. And if you're in this room and you're working the program and have been doing it a while, chances are you're doing it right now. And I hope I am. I'm trying to. It's just the way we're wired. That said, I'm going to try to tell you a little bit about what it was like for me, what happened, and what it's like now. And I got to tell you up front, I'm a little heavy on the what it's like, what it was like, and what happened, because that's most of my life. So let me start by saying I wouldn't trade the life I have today for anything. I love where I am and what I'm doing. I love the people that I'm with. I love the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and what it's done for me. I love the fact that I'm developing a relationship with my higher power. For me, it's God, that I've never had before. I love going to meetings. I love going to 6:30 meetings even Zoom meetings, which we've done a lot of lately. And I love you all. So I was born during the baby boom. Maybe at least one other person in here that was. And I grew up in a small town in Kentucky. And Laurie knows just how small that little town is because she had the opportunity to see it this summer. It was a great place to grow up, and I had a good childhood. I was fortunate to have two parents in my life when I was growing up. I had a good relationship with them for the most part, and my sister, which is my only sibling. I had pretty much everything I wanted. That said, I always wanted more. I guess it was, you'd say it was a Christian environment. Both my mother and father were involved in the church, Southern Baptist Church. And I went to Sunday school and church almost every Sunday, whether I wanted to or not. I believed in God ever since I can remember. But the God I believed in back then is a different God, or I guess I should say my understanding of God is a lot different now than it was then. My dad always had a good job, even though he was an active alcoholic. I guess he was a successful businessman by most standards, and pretty well respected in the town. He was a retired Army officer. He'd been severely wounded. Actually, had died on a battlefield in Italy in World War II, and the medics were able to bring him back to life. So I guess it's fair to say God was at work in my life before I even had life. My mother was also a retired Army officer, a nurse, and both parents worked when all the time I was growing up, and pretty much came and went as I wanted to. And I managed to avoid getting into real trouble, and I credit sports with that. Whatever the season, I tried to play it. Sports were my life. Football, baseball, basketball, pinball, odd infinite, whatever I played. So life was good when I was a kid. I graduated from high school like most of my classmates, a lot of them. And we'd had pretty good ball teams in school. And I was able to get a decent scholarship to a pretty good small college. And I played football for 4 years. I was 40 pounds heavier then. Baseball for a couple of years. Studied about as much as I had to, and managed to get a degree and learned a hell of a lot about partying. That's part of the overall college experience, right? But I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and that's the only reason a lot of that stuff happened for me. I guess this is where I should start talking about alcohol because, well, that's why we're here, and it's a huge part of my story. I didn't realize that my dad was an alcoholic until probably my sophomore, junior year in high school. He was a pretty low-key alcoholic, if there is such a thing. He always had a good job, didn't get in any trouble with the law or financial trouble, as far as I knew, and it was a small town. I probably would have known. And he wasn't abusive to my mother or us. But his alcoholic behavior began to get a lot more noticeable during my senior year in high school. Pardon me. She fed me this Topo Chico, and I'm going, and I keep drinking it. But it began to be a lot more noticeable during my senior year in high school, and it got even worse after I went away to college. When I'd come home, we'd argue a lot, and I was responsible for a lot of that because I was building a powerful resentment, and that was probably before I even know what a resentment was. I didn't know until I got into the program, probably. So I just stopped going home. I left it for my mother and my sister to deal with, and something I've always regretted. I should have stepped up and didn't. But there was a happy ending to that part of my story. He was sober for the last 15 years of his life, and it had to have been a God thing. He did it without a program, without any outside help, as far as I know. And for that, I'm certainly grateful. I don't remember exactly when my first drink was, but it was sometime during the summer between my freshman and sophomore year in high school. I did it because everybody else was doing it. All my role models were doing it, so I did it. But I like the taste of alcohol, especially beer, right from the get-go. And I seem to be able to drink as much or more than a lot of them did. But in high school, my friends and I pretty much limited our drinking to the time between the various sports seasons, and of course all summer. But then I quit baseball after my sophomore year because it was really interfering with my extracurricular activities. Those spring parties were the absolute best, and I didn't want to miss anything. Looking back, I guess that was the first time I really began to change my goals to meet my behavior, my preferred behavior, which was drinking a lot. Alcohol was becoming a bigger and a bigger part of my life, and I was perfecting my drinking skills. I was getting pretty good at it. Toward the end of my senior year in college, I was offered a job by AT&T to work in one of their subsidiary companies, and I took it and started it the week after graduation. I was tired of school. Life-changing event number one for me. And not everybody was getting jobs right out of school, and I was nothing special, a very average student. But again, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and they wanted somebody, and they hired me. I ended up having responsibility for 400 women. Back at the time, they called them long-distance operators. No such thing anymore. And I didn't have a clue. They taught me a whole lot more than I did, a lot more about the job and a lot more about life. So I did learn some things in that job. The year after I started, I experienced another life-changing event. I got married. Got married to a girl that I dated the last year and a half or so in college, and she didn't drink at that time, or very little. I figured I could change that. She'd always been pretty tolerant of my drinking in school, we worked on it. But pretty soon I started hearing those dreaded words, "Haven't you had enough?" And that wasn't a question. And that was after like 2 or 3 beers. So I could see that there was going to be a big problem here. And that's when my professional drinking career really took off. It really blossomed. I started drinking every day after work, all weekend, most every weekend. And that would be my default mode for 40 plus years. By my second year in the workaday world, I was drinking at least a dozen beers a day. That was never enough. Plus the nutritional supplements, mostly bourbon, vodka, rum, anything that had a 40 or 50% alcohol content. The beer tasted good and got me started, and the liquor gave me that boost into my own personal fourth dimension. And I'm sure my then wife had no idea how much I was drinking, because I was really getting good at sneaky. That was a skill that I've nurtured and brought along, for many years. I'm still pretty good at it. I don't practice it much, but I'm pretty good at it. So I spent a lot of time and effort trying to juggle my new business career with my alcohol management program and the other bits and pieces of my life. And normal people have no idea how stressful that can be. It's hard. I was developing and I wasn't drinking before work yet, or at lunch, unless there's a special occasion or something. But I was developing a real affinity for alcohol. I liked the taste, loved the effect, and I dealt with the hangovers. And I dealt with the hangovers by exercising a lot, mostly running. Running became almost as much of an obsession for me as alcohol, almost, but not quite as much of an obsession for me as alcohol did. It gave my life a lot of balance. I could get up in the morning and exercise, sweat, probably call it toxic cleansing these days, to get my mind and my body ready for a little work and a lot more drinking. And that would be my default mode for another 40 plus years. But I had this problem with expectations. I always wanted more. What I was doing was never quite enough. The telephone company job was okay. Not enough of a challenge, not interesting enough. Just not enough money. So on to the next life-changing event. What's this, 3 or 4 now? During my 3rd year with the telephone company, I was offered a job with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. And how that came about's a whole other story for another time, but it was the same deal. I was just in the right place at the right time. I mean, I didn't even meet the minimum requirements on paper. And my only real reservation about taking the job was how it was going to affect my my alcohol program and my drinking. So I was definitely thinking again about how my goals would affect my preferred behavior, which was drinking a lot. I was pretty sure that I hadn't done anything stupid after I got out of college, that it would come up on the background investigation. I hadn't had any DUIs, hadn't been arrested, hadn't stolen any money, or I didn't get caught if I had. And that was mostly because I isolated myself after I got out of college when I was drinking. I worked hard at staying under the radar. But I decided to take the risk, and I said, Mr. Hoover, some of you are old enough to know who J. Edgar Hoover was still around then. I said, Mr. Hoover, your prayers have been answered. I'm here, I'm ready to serve. Where do you want me? When do I start? And is there money involved? Anyway, I accepted the offer, and off I went to Washington. My wife and 1-month-old son stayed with her parents in Kentucky while I was off in Washington and Quantico, Virginia, in training and working for 6 months or so. And I guess I should mention that I didn't bother to tell my then wife about this little project until after I'd already taken the job. She, being the controlling personality that she was, I knew that she wouldn't buy into it, so I just took the path of least resistance, and I made the decision myself. So that was probably the beginning of the end of a marriage that somehow lasted 40 plus years. So I was an FBI agent for over 15 years, and I was fortunate to have had some great assignments, and it was deja vu all over again. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. There were times I was walking down the hall past the boss's office, and he said, "Edwards, you got a little time?" I said, "Sure, boss. What do you want me to do?" He said, "Would you hop on a plane and go to San Diego and interview a couple people?" And I said, "Well, as soon as I get my sunscreen and my bathing suit, I'll be there." And it just kind of went like that for me. I was able to work on some of the most high-profile cases that the Bureau had going at the time. I traveled all over. I saw lots of things and places that most people never get to see. Most people probably wouldn't want to see a lot of them. Aircraft hijackings. I worked on back when that was a thing. I worked on an organized crime task force back when organized crime was the Italian mafia and not Mexican drug cartels. And a lot of bank robberies. Most of you have heard Danny's story. And if I'd only known he was down here in Texas perpetrating a one-man crime wave, I'd been here in a New York minute. Low-hanging fruit. And our friend BJ was down here selling hard dry goods. But both those guys have since seen the errors of their ways, and they've come to be the men that we know and love. But fortunately, I never shot anybody. I never got shot. I didn't get shot at a few times. And I got hit in the head with a baseball bat one time. That was embarrassing, but that's another story for another time. But it didn't take long to find out that the FBI had agents, men and women that had interests and behaviors that were similar to mine. There were plenty in my new agents class. By the way, I was in the first group of new agents class, the group of new agents classes that had the first female FBI agents. And as a general rule, they worked hard and liked to play hard. And I don't mean to say that all FBI agents are or were that way. Far from it. But for those of us that were inclined to have a drink or a few drinks after work, we tended to kind of gravitate toward each other. So I didn't really have to curtail my drinking at all. It wasn't unusual for those of us that were traveling on special assignment, which happened fairly frequently, to work a 14 or 16-hour day, drink for 3 or 4 hours or more, sleep for a couple hours, get up in the morning, do the toxic cleansing thing, start all over again, rinse and repeat, and sometimes for weeks at a time. And we were technically on duty 24/7, 365, but there were workarounds. There were always workarounds. It was a good job for the most part, and a fun job for the most part, and I kept going where they wanted me to go and doing what they wanted me to do and volunteering for the things that I wanted to do. And I was a pretty happy dude for quite a while. I didn't think much about what it did for my family back in those days, but it really was beginning to affect the family. We'd moved 5 or 6 times in 15 years, and I was looking at just a series of moves in and out of Washington, D.C. My kids were beginning to get involved in a lot of activities, and I was missing them. I'd always traveled a lot, but it became constant over the last few years. And I guess the real kicker was I'd gotten some death threats, which wasn't unusual, but some of them were directed at my family. So it was time to pull the plug. So I put some feelers out and was offered a job in the corporate security department of a corporation based in Houston, and I decided to accept it and move the family down here from Michigan, where I was stationed at the time, and have been here for 30 plus years and love it. It's definitely home and always will be. This company that I went to work for had facilities all over the world, and I managed to visit most of them with little or no adult supervision. So I drank as much as I could, as often as I could, on the expense account, if I could get by with it. And I drank in some of the coolest places in the world, and I drank in some really nasty places, which is kind of what we tend to do too. I knew when I could drink before work if I wanted to. I knew when I could drink at lunch and what I could drink, and I knew I could drink after work and at meetings, or I pretty much had that down to a science. my alcohol management program was working like a well-oiled machine. So after 15 years, I decided it was time to do something else. And life-changing event number 5 or 6. So at about that same time, an opportunity came along for me to start my own business, doing pretty much the same thing, running the security organizations of several different companies. And right from day one, I had clients with work all over the world. And it was the same thing. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. I had this client base handed to me, and life was good. I traveled continuously for the first 15 years. And I was technically my own boss. And for any of you that are in business for yourself, if you've got more than one customer or client, you know how ridiculous that idea is. I don't think you can ever be your own boss. Anyway, I thought it would fit in well with my alcohol management program. I could drink whenever I wanted to, nothing to hold me back. And it was all good until it wasn't. About a year after I started my company, my fabulous alcohol management plan began to fall apart, and so did my personal life. Business was good, but life began to suck big time. I had my first alcohol-related meltdown on August 31st, 2001. It was at my youngest daughter's wedding. And after 4 or 5 days of nonstop drinking before, during, and after wedding events, I had an alcohol-induced seizure. The timing couldn't have been worse. It was during the rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding. Boom, me on the floor, rolling around. EMTs rush in, ambulance trip to the hospital, or so I was told, and many times. And so I spent the night in the hospital, and they gave me whatever they gave me, and got out just in time to go to the wedding. And if things had been bad between my now ex-wife and me before that, they really got worse fast. So after the dust settled, I made 3 promises to my wife and kids, mostly for the benefit of the kids. I wouldn't drink anymore. I was obviously allergic to alcohol. I'd get some professional help, and I'd go to AA. I think I set the bar a little too high. But I did quit drinking at least for several years. I went to a psychiatrist or a psychologist once, and that didn't seem to do me any good. And I went to my first AA meeting about 2 weeks later. It was on September 12th, 2001, the day after 9/11, 2001, which most of you will remember, so it's easy for me to remember. And I went to that first meeting and kept on going back to keep the heat off at home, and I'm sure that sounds familiar to some of the rest of us in this room. I went because other people wanted me to, and not because I wanted to. And I managed to stay sober for 7 years that time by going to some meetings, pretending to work the program, but it wasn't because I wanted to quit drinking. I didn't. I had no intention to stop. One day at a time for me was one day at a time, staying sober until the next time I had my next drink. That was what it meant to me. But the reason I stopped was out of fear. I was just afraid of losing the people and the things that were most important to me. That was the only reason. So for the first few years, I went to at least one meeting a week, sometimes 2. a week, not a day. So you can tell I was really into the program. And then I started going when it was convenient. And when I went to meetings, I listened some of the time. I didn't hear what you all were saying. I didn't really want to hear it. I read the book a few times, but I didn't make any effort to absorb it or use it. And I half-assed worked the steps several times in my head and without a sponsor, and we all know how that works. Not. And I didn't intend to ask anybody for help, and that seemed to be a condition of membership in this organization. I just wasn't going to do that. And worse, I totally blew off all references to God, to a higher power, and the huge part that he played in this whole thing. I believed in God, like I said, ever since I can remember, but my understanding, and that's pretty much where the relationship ended, my understanding of God just didn't sync with what you all were saying. And I just didn't get this idea of turning everything over to a higher power, or I didn't want to get it. So I began to push the program, the steps, and the meetings further and further down my priority list. And after about 5 years, I stopped going altogether to meetings. And almost 7 years to the day, I went out. I pulled out the old alcohol management program manual, and I worked it hard. And there was no reason why nothing happened in my life that I could blame it on. I'd given sober living a good shot. I wasn't any happier. My personal life wasn't any better. I'd never intended to totally stop drinking. And I'd never considered the downside or the consequences. I never once considered the impact on my family and my life and my physical well-being. So I'd totally forgotten about where I was in 2001 when I went to that first meeting and what made me go to that first meeting. So I've been in and out of sobriety, been out in these rooms several times, more than a few times in 20 years. Every time I went out, it was the same thing. I knew I couldn't stop once I started, but I didn't care. And every time I went out, it was the same thing. Life and living just got much worse, much faster, exactly like the book says it does. In 2017, my now ex-wife and I were divorced. She'd apparently had enough, and so had I, and 3 kids. All had their own families and were doing their own things. And marriage, like I said, had been going downhill for a lot of years. And it turned out to be the best thing that could have happened for my sobriety. In February and March of that year, I did do a world-renowned 6-step IOP, 6-week IOP, voluntarily and on my own dime. And I learned a lot about alcoholism. I stayed sober the whole time, and I graduated near the top of my class. You laugh. And the best thing was I got a brand new $4,000 big book. And it was paperback. It's none of that cardboard stuff. Anyway, I still wasn't ready yet. And after that, I drank on and off until just before Thanksgiving of 2017. Thanksgiving Day of 2017, I started a free fall right to the bottom, and I couldn't stop. I'd lost all control, and I almost lost my life. I started drinking that day and drank nearly every waking hour which was probably at least 20, for 2 solid months. The last few days, I was dimly aware of my own existence. I couldn't stay drunk, couldn't get sober, couldn't eat or drink except a little vodka every now and then to keep the edge off. I couldn't even watch TV. I couldn't move. I just sat there going in and out of oblivion. And I know I said some foxhole prayers. I didn't want to die, but I really thought I was going to. And I came really close. I'm not completely sure what day I had my last drink, but I know I didn't drink on January 19, 2018. The night before, I managed to get my fingers to work well enough to dial one of my daughters, call one of my daughters, and she and my son came over. I told her the absolute truth. I said I had a terrible case of the flu, and I thought I needed to go to the urgent care place. I couldn't drive myself, so they came over and they took me to the Methodist Hospital ER. I guess she thought I needed something a little more than just the urgent care place. And after about 6 years of 6 hours, it seemed like 6 years, waiting, processing, exams, they declared that I was dehydrated, severely malnourished, and I had rhabdomyolysis. Google it, but don't get it. It's terrible. It's this systematic breakdown of muscle tissue. It dumps into the bloodstream and can cause extreme damage to your kidneys. And I didn't need any more organ damage, that's for sure. And you'll never guess what else they said. It was probably alcohol related. I said, I just had a couple. I use that line a lot. Nobody else has, right? But when I woke up and came out of the fog, my first thought wasn't about getting another drink or alcohol. It would have been, given my history and my past. My first thought was that I don't want to do this anymore. I'm ready to quit. I'm ready for whatever cure there might be. And that was a sensation that I had never felt before. I was laying there and there was just a sense of peacefulness and relief. And I hadn't done a thing yet other than lay there. And of course that might have been the drugs, but I don't think so. So I was in the hospital for about a week. At least 2 different doctors told me if I'd waited any longer, I would not have made it through the night. And if I didn't stop like immediately, I would die probably sooner rather than later. Well, I sure didn't want that. So while I was there, all my 3 kids stopped by to visit. They must have just been in the neighborhood, I guess. And I think they came ready to beg and plead and argue, but they didn't have to. I told them right out that I was totally ready to quit, and I was going to do all the things that I'd promised to do before. And they said, right. But I knew they were going to support me, and they had been tremendously supportive all through this journey. And I also knew there wouldn't be any more last chances with them or myself, my life. I knew I had to quit for real this time, and I was ready. Based on my previous experience, I also knew that AA was probably the only real option that I had. So after a week in the real hospital, I spent another week in a rehab hospital, relearning how to walk again. And fortunately, I'd been in pretty good shape going into this nosedive. About a week after I got out of the rehab hospital, I was ready to suit up and go to a meeting. But I needed to find a meeting to go to get this thing rolling. And my little sister, who's also in the program in Kentucky, put me in touch with a much younger Danny Brown through a common acquaintance, and Danny invited me to come over here, this very room, one Friday night, and And I did. And this time I came to meetings because I knew I had to, not just because somebody else wanted me to, or thought I should. And I kept coming back because I wanted to. And I started with that first meeting. I had a totally different feel about the whole thing. I really did see what you all had going for you, and I wanted it. One of a couple hundred cliches we have, but it is so true. And I was willing to do whatever it took to get it, and it wasn't nearly as hard this time. Actually, it wasn't hard at all. It hasn't been so far. And the book said that I might be having something called a spiritual awakening. And I had no idea what that might look like. And as far as I knew, I'd never had such a thing. But looking back, I'm pretty sure that sensation I had when I was lying there in the hospital bed, that feeling of freedom and peace was, in fact, a spiritual awakening. And after I started going to meetings again and reading the book again and listening to what you had to say and working with my sponsor, not as much as I should, I began to understand that seeing this program and what it did in a totally different light than I ever had before was the beginning of a spiritual experience that I'm living right now. And I got to say, I was a person that probably never would have believed in those kinds of things, but I sure do now. No burning bushes, no sudden and spectacular upheavals like the book says. No lightning bolts. It's just a thing. It's just a kind of a gradual thing. And as I've gotten deeper into the program, I've come to realize that God is up there, or He's in here, and He's at work, and maybe in some not so obvious ways, but He has been there, and He's been there all my life. Within a few weeks after I started coming back, I was ready to do the deal. I was ready to get a sponsor, totally ready to work the program and the steps. Ready to give rather than just take like I'd done all my life. And when I came back into these rooms, I actually started listening to what you all were saying. And there have been so many things that have happened in my life that I should have been grateful for but wasn't, and expressed my gratitude for but didn't. I've come to the realization that I was wrong when I thought that all these situations that I talked about were just a matter of being in the right place at the right time. There was a lot more to it than that, and that God was involved in some way. I've got 3 great kids that have all turned out to be responsible adults. I've had the opportunity to see things and places that most people don't have the opportunity to do. With the help of God in this program, I've had more sober days than drunk days over the past 20 years, and more wins and losses, and for that I'm truly grateful. And it's been a crazy ride, not without its setbacks, but a setback is a setup for a comeback, right? And you look at these promises that give us all hope. There have been so many of them that have come true for me since I've been here. I don't see that there's anybody that's new in here, but if you are, if you're trying to decide whether you should be here or not, give it a chance. I promise you that they can come true for you if you give it a little bit of effort. But back to me, I'm kind of getting the hang of changing my behavior to support my objectives again. Still have a lot of work to do, and I always will. Trying to get out of self is a daily battle. When I pray, it's one thing I consistently pray about, and I try to do that every day. I still have a big problem with complacency. Maybe that's the worst thing that can happen to a person in this program. And so still a work in progress. I know it always will be. But the health of this program, the inspiration of the people in these rooms, a lot of direction from my higher power and a little work, I'm happier than I can ever remember being. And I have absolutely no intention of going back to the life the way it was. And I never intend to. In a meeting a couple of weeks ago, I know Danny was there, Joe S. Said something that to the effect that as a result of AA, doors had opened for him that allowed him to do things that he never expected to do, probably never knew he wanted to do. That is so true for me. I've made a lot of great friends from all kinds of backgrounds. I've done things that I never expected or knew I wanted to do. Stayed sober by choice, something I've never wanted to do. And maybe best of all, I met and married my fantastic wife, Laurie. And what a tremendous inspiration and joy she is. Thank you all for letting me tell this story, and thank you for being here. I love you all.
Thank you.
That was great.